All right, well, let's close out this lecture set, or at least the lecture slides component, by putting all of this together. Now, this is going to be pretty short because ultimately putting all this together is I don't want to say easy, but it's relatively straightforward. And frankly, y'all could probably use a short video after some of the extraordinarily lengthy ones we've had thus far. I apologize about that. So let's quickly talk through putting it all together, and that's how we'll end up our lecture set, at least with the slides. The thing about putting it all together is that there's no real right answer. There's a bunch of different recommendations or formulas in terms of how you incorporate graphics and inferential statistics and descriptive statistics and study design details, etc. But there's not really a right answer, at least not in my experience. Now, I commonly see that descriptive statistics are typically used to describe the sample. So for like demographic calculations, you'll see descriptive statistics used. I typically see inferential statistics used to address the research questions. And these are typically supported by descriptive statistics. And typically these are what our graphics are relating to, are the research question topics and inferential statistics used. So inferential statistics and graphics tend to go together in terms of the reporting of these findings. Once you're done reporting some of the details, in the discussion, typically discussions will revolve around the effect size of statistically significant from inferential findings. So again, effect size is based on the inferential results. We'll talk about statistically significant findings, effect sizes of those, and potential field implications. Of course, recall from our previous video's discussion that those implications are within the context of the study design. A lot of external validity goes there, a lot of internal validity. What are alternate explanations of this? Could those undercut the implications for a broader context? Based on external validity, how does my sample, what population does that align to? Who does that then apply to? How is my study design constructed, and who then does that apply to? All of that relates to our discussion of the effects of the program and what others could expect to see based on this. Of course, outside of just a discussion of the results, we talked in previous lecture videos about the broader context of the interpretation and implementation, that there's things that statistics don't account for, things like the cost of implementation, things like the manpower, things like the willpower of implementation, the risks associated with one decision or another. All of those things are also taken into account in the discussion, and this is where it comes in our story. Now, the key point within this that I commonly see is that all three are being used. I'm using descriptives, I'm using inferential, I'm using the effect size, I'm doing this with respect to the study design, I'm taking into account the broader context. All of this is being used, and all three, I think the three I had were study design, statistics, and graphics, each with the subcomponents that we've talked about. So this big mix of the three are being used. I think for me, again, there's no real right answer. What I recommend is to mix all three. I think that tends to be a good idea. I think that each has their own goal and purpose, and I really encourage you to go back and review some of these discussions. I know they've been lengthy, but hopefully they've also been filled with content of the goals and purposes that things do and don't accomplish. Those are, though they might seem, I don't know, they might seem like too much, are actually extraordinarily important when it comes to put all this together. Think through, what does this actually do? What does this contribute to my statistical story or to my argument? What does this provide? What evidence does this bring? And what evidence does this not bring? Because descriptive statistics by themselves are not enough. Inferential statistics by themselves are not enough. Effect sizes by themselves are not enough. Graphics by themselves are not enough. And we have talked through with each and every one of those things the limitations of just providing one. what it's missing and what the other things bring. So for me, because each of those by themselves are almost never enough, and I'm going to just say never enough. They really are never enough. I'm sure there's a case where that's wrong, but I'm sure there's a lot more cases where that's right, and a lot more cases where that needs to be said in that way. But because these are never enough, mixing all three, and again, for every link in your argument chain, for every slide in your statistical presentation, for every page and paragraph you're writing, think through what is the story that I'm trying to tell, and how does this evidence contribute to the story? Then think through, if you're trying to tell a story, you're thinking through the evidence you want to say, think through what is the best representation of that evidence. So I have some evidence. Do I present it descriptively? Am I telling what happened? Do I present it inferentially? Do I talk about how it's related, the sample's related to the population and the population level decisions? Do I present it graphically, really illustrating and telling a story with data in a very easy to understand way, but which can, without the other two, potentially be misleading? How can I put these together, and what, when I'm telling my story, be it again on paper, be it via presentation, be it orally, what my purpose is for each component of that story. Not just the story overall, but each part of the story. Because remember, stories have multiple parts. And for each part of the story, I have a different goal and a different purpose. So be intentional about selecting what's my purpose, what's my goal, and be intentional then about selecting the types of information, the types of evidence that you end up including. All right. So in the next stage of this class, for better or worse, we are going to move somewhat away from the calculations, not completely, but somewhat. And we're going to move towards reading. We're going to look at how is this stuff actually applied. We've talked about the basics. We've talked about how we put all the pieces together. And now we're going to look and see how it's applied. So we're going to look at journal articles for the rest of class. I think there's going to be at least 2 journal articles assigned each week for the rest of class. One might be one we discuss in lecture, and then I think you'll have one that you reflect on for your article review assignments. So within this, on the journal article format, there is a different format with journal articles, and it's a bit stricter than what we tend to have. I mention this because I want you to read through these articles. I want you to see A, what's happening in research. B, I want you to see how people are writing about this. How are they telling their stories? And that's, I guess, first of all, what I want you to see with these. Read them as potential examples, good or bad. Maybe there's a lot you don't like about it. Think through that. Why don't you like this? What could they have done better? Hopefully there's a lot of good things you're seeing. Hey, they explain that really clearly. I liked how they do that. So read them as examples on how to communicate, how to tell statistical stories. Remember, it's not about making the strongest claim, or sometimes not even about making the clearest statement. It's about being accurate. It's about making those statements within the broader contexts. And again, using multiple pieces of information to support them. While you read, also consider these articles have much more structure than traditional reports outside of academia. And while this is good in some cases, this isn't always necessarily a good thing. So these are pretty structured typically, and you'll see that in the articles that we have for this assignment, or for the future assignments. So within this, one of the things that they have different is they are very closely tied to previous literature. The literature review, which is going to be a section within each of these, might seem different than anything that we've discussed, and we really don't have an analog that we've discussed in this lecture set. The literature review component really just adds the context and importance to results. It addresses the question, why are we looking at this anyway? And in terms of a non-academic report, you can think of it kind of as the background to that report. Outside of that, journal articles are typically use 5 sections when they're written. They typically have an introduction section, or I say 5. usually 4 or 5 sections, and the names are close, but maybe not identical to this. They don't have to have these exact names. So introduction, a lit review section, usually a methods section, a results section, and a conclusions. Sometimes this one's called discussion section. So look for these different sections within the paper. For these, the content that we've talked about in this lecture set is mostly within methods, results, and conclusions. Methods are like a lot of the details of how this study was conducted and demographics regarding participants. Results is typically the inferential statistics part, answering the research questions with graphics to support. Conclusions is those discussions that we've talked about that really pull the details from both the context of the sample that we used, like what population are they representing, the details of the study design, and the inferential statistics, and try to make decisions or make recommendations based on there. So look within these 3 sections, methods, results, and conclusions, to really match with what we have talked about in this lecture set. And that's going to be it for our time today. These have been some pretty big ones, but I hope they've been helpful. I know there's a lot of concepts covered in them, so please take the time to go back over them if you need to. And I really hope that throughout the rest of class, you're going to get to see this exemplified. For me, this is a real change in our class dynamic, intentionally so. This isn't an accident. It's like, oh no, we got a audible or anything like that. This has been designed this way from the beginning. We've been really working through kind of getting the base skills up to speed thus far. And again, we're not going to stop building. We're going to have, I think it's one new analytic method each week moving forward. So we're not going to stop building on those analytic skills, but now we're going to split the focus. So now it's not just going to be focused on building the skills. It's not just going to be focused on how we do this. Now we're going to start looking at seeing this done in practice and seeing what does this look like? How can we read and interpret this? How can we use this in line with our course being very practitioner-oriented, very usage-oriented? So we're going to start looking at that a lot more now that we've seen not just how to make some of the statistics, but how can we put them together in a meaningful way. So I hope you find value in that, and I hope you're able to better read and look for that in these articles that are upcoming.